We're going to do a panel discussion here. We'll just kind of chew the fat for an hour. It's kind of a little like improv comedy, but we're going to take suggestions from the audience. Ask preferably really controversial questions to get us arguing with each other. That's good. It's no fun if we all agree with each other. So choose your questions carefully. So let's kind of do the brief introductions here. We got David Burns. He's the maintainer of the Python bindings. Welcome. Jim Evans, the maintainer of the IE bindings and the .NET bindings. Brett Petticord, creator of the Water Project. Adam Goucher, maintainer of Selenium IDE. And has got the most time on stage so far accumulated, kind of like astronauts in space. You've got, yeah. And Kevin Menard, maintainer of the Selenium Grid project. We've also got Simon Stewart. You were just over that, I swear, yeah. So, who? Thank you. Welcome. I should introduce you, but you don't need one. So I was going to open it up with a controversial question to kind of like show you an example of, hey, here's us arguing, but that's no fun. I would rather just be completely surprised. We agreed that we won't start with we won't start with one. Yeah, there you go, let's go.
Where's Grid going in Selenium 2?
We got a talk tomorrow, just for you. All right. Do you want to pass around the microphone, Jason?
We should. So, here we go. Repeat the question.
All right, sure. The question was, where is Grid going in face of Selenium 2, right? So Francois Renaud, wherever he is, he's a French guy hanging back there someplace. He basically rewrote Selenium Grid to support both the WebDriver and the older Selenium 1 protocols. And we have a talk tomorrow at, I think, 11:15, where we'll go through all that a bit more. So, yep.
One controversial question that we could ask is, and this is something Adam and I discussed, is do we actually need something like Grid from the project, or is it something that we could do ourselves?
As a foreign project? Do we need it in the project? Yes. Yes, I think we do. So, I mean, like the really nice thing that we do with the Selenium project is we cater for the brand new user, the person who's just been introduced to automated testing today, and we do that through the IDE. And the IDE is kind of quite handy if you've never done programming or you want to get started quickly. And then we cater for like developers of a range of skill levels through the APIs that we offer, the WebDriver APIs, the Selenium RC APIs. And that's kind of cool. But then there's a gap, because as people start using these things more and more, they suddenly go, you know what, my desktop machine is creaking as it tries to fire up 82 instances of Firefox to try and run my tests before the heat death of the universe. And so you need a way to start running these things in parallel. Now, if people are willing to maintain the grid themselves, which some companies are, like some companies don't like to have their internal web apps, particularly their dev ones, exposed to the outside world on shared resources. So like Source Labs provides infrastructure for the public, but sometimes people don't want to expose that stuff. Like, we've already seen that there's pent-up demand for it. Like, Google built their own grid. I know at least 2 or 3 other grids that exist. Like, we ought to provide that as a piece of basic infrastructure. Now, do we attach all the bells and whistles and make it fantastic? No, but we ought to make it extensible so that it could be made fantastic by the people who need that additional capability. And if someone just wants to run on 5 spare machines they've got, it should work pretty well on that out of the box.
I can just yell. So that was a targeted question at me. So I would disagree, and I say that you do not need to have Grid, and you can rely on your CI infrastructure to do the parallelism and job scheduling and running and reporting and ease of debugging. So in a number of clients that I have that have looked down Grid, we have replaced Grid with Jenkins running remote agents, and everything fits nicely into their continuous delivery model, and they're pushing code out without the added layer of Grid.
Well, we're going for quantity, not quality, on numbers of questions here. So, next question from the audience. Yes.
So we have Selenium WebDriver and now we have Water WebDriver which uses Selenium WebDriver and makes it basically more readable and usable. Why these two projects exist separately? Why not make Selenium WebDriver more readable?
So, it's kind of a game of, like, repeat the question. You are a fan of the movie Highlander, and there can only be one winner. There is Water WebDriver and Selenium WebDriver. What was that? Fight, yes. So one should win is the question. Why have two? Anybody?
Well, I think they're two different layers, and one is really going down to the as a wrapper around the WebDriver protocol, and it basically handles the handoff, and then the other one handles the translation into the Water API. So I guess there's two ways to look at the question. One, you could say, why do you need to translate it into the Water API? And if that's the question, then the answer is because a lot of people already have tests on that API, so they want to keep running them. The other way of asking the question is well, why is that 2 gems instead of 1? And why do I have to install 2 gems? And why don't you just join the projects together? And my personal preference with Ruby gems and with Ruby libraries is to have small gems with a clear purpose. And I think it's easier to make updates. You can update the pieces that you need, and people have it. There are problems. It puts a certain amount of the configuration management on the user, and that can lead to problems sometimes. But there's also our tools in the Ruby community, like Bundler, which help people manage their gem dependencies so that doesn't get out of hand.
The thing I was going to add is that people prefer different styles of APIs. And the WebDriver API is one style, and the Water API is another style. And sometimes taste enters into it occasionally, and personal preference. Like we like to think that we don't believe in taste and beauty when it comes to computer science. It's cold, hard data, and it's not. Next question. In the back.
So the question is there a future for supporting load testing with Selenium in the future? So this is an excellently juicy, controversial question. And it's so unfair that Patrick is not within eye-shot distance. Where is Patrick? Patrick. Okay, so I'm just gonna totally pick on you, and then I might actually provoke you into coming here, unless you're working on your keynote slides. But so here's the thing. The answer is no, never, ever, no, no. Because to do, let's say, 1,000 load tests with 1,000 browsers, that's the stupidest way you could possibly ever use 1,000 machines, ever. What you should do is probably use Apache Bench or something to peg your server at 100%, get it under load. You can do that with just C code, like JMeter or something. And then you sprinkle in a couple of browser sessions, specifically to kind of start doing some performance client-side measurements to see what the client-side experience is under load. But you peg the server just doing that, and it's stupid to do that with 1,000 browsers. You could just do it with a multi-core machine. But there are other people in the world who have setups and they're Selenium-based, where you actually just, if you want 1,000 machine load test, will just spin up 1,000 machines. But so if anyone wants to refute that opinion, they're more than welcome to. it might be a simplistic view, but I'm right. Anybody else? And Patrick, specifically, do you want to? Duels are no longer legal, but in California. Anyway, okay, later. Anybody else wants to take that one? No. All right. Next question. Wait. Who is next? In the middle?
Okay, I can stop you there because I know this question. The question is, HTML unit, how good is it and how much effort should I invest in making my tests work on it? HTML unit is a fantastic piece of kit. It's an amazing accomplishment. It's, for those of you who don't know, it's a browser simulated entirely in Java, which is headless, so it doesn't consume any resources, and it uses the Rhino JavaScript engine to run JavaScript. Now, and it does like a lot of stuff. It can run basic GWT apps, and it's fantastic. The problem is that nobody out there on the planet that I know of is regularly browsing the web on a headless Java-based browser that uses Rhino as its JavaScript engine. God bless them if they are. So what I tend to do is, like in the simple cases, HTML unit allows you to quickly scale out your tests on a machine. When you start running into problems where HTML unit isn't working, just flip it out. Like move to the Firefox driver. If you're worried about having a display, take a look. There's a sister project called webkitdriver.googlecode.com, WebKit driver, which is a headless WebKit implementation. Again, nobody browses a web on a headless WebKit implementation, so it won't be perfect, but it will probably be better than HTML unit. So use it, but when it doesn't work, don't use it. There's a guy in a red... Oh, Jim.
So that brings me up to a comment that I have about, the thing that's appealing about HTML unit or a headless WebKit implementation is it's bloomin' fast. And you can run a lot of tests a lot quicker because there's not all this rendering code involved, and you don't have to actually render stuff to the screen, which for browsers is kind of slow. So there is, I feel like there's a real need and a real desire to have a headless implementation that we can use not as the end-all be-all. It will never replace true rendered browser testing, but as a sanity check to get things done quickly, I think it really kind of can't be beat.
All right, next question. No, one more comment.
The problem with using headless, I find, is that if you want to actually see if it does go horribly wrong, you have to then rerun it in Firefox driver or something like that, just so that you can actually see what's going wrong. Even if it's running on a different machine and you're taking screenshots or you've got it recording video, you still need some way of actually rendering the thing. You could push it around to actually see, but it's something you've got to always worry about.
What we really need is a headless X server, and then all these problems would go away. We'd just use the real browsers, and it would be OK. Chap in the red shirt who's desperately been trying to ask a question, and our pointing fingers aren't working.
So we're kind of just getting started. We only have a couple dozen tests running, and we have a web app, and we're using Selenium, we're just starting to bump into this issue around tests. Should they depend on data that was generated from previous tests? And I thought you guys probably have a lot of opinions around this.
OK, so the question is, should tests depend on data that's been established by other tests? No.
Should we get just no's all the way down the line?
The reason is because you want to be able to run them in parallel to reduce your test times. And if they've got dependencies, then you're bloating your test times unnecessarily.
The one thing that we do is we sometimes have certain tests that set up a bunch of data, and we run that as a separate thing, and then we run all the tests like after that. So we kind of have two sets of tests. But I certainly wouldn't be in favor of having, B depend on A, and C depend on B, and D depend on A. A lot of times, that's how your manual scripts are kind of written, and that's how a lot of people are used to thinking about testing when they're testing manually. It's a way of optimizing effort when you're doing manual testing, and so a lot of people have been trained to think that way, and it's no longer optimal when you're doing automation to organize it that way, because the independence that you're talking about is what really is going to start optimizing your ability to understand your failures and to use your tests, and that requires a rethinking of kind of what the boundaries of your tests are.
So I was on, or I've heard some good tips about like how to enforce parallelism or isolation between the tests. And one of those things is run all your tests in a random order all the time, or forwards and backwards, and just constantly splitting it out. That just kind of enforces this parallelism. And the reason why you want to do that is because throwing more hardware at the problem is actually pretty elegant when you want to speed things up. There's a lot of more optimizations you can do, but if you want things to go almost twice as fast, put another machine into your grid. And you can't do that if you've got everything depending on the previous thing. The other thing, as far as a trick on, you've got, let's say, a thing where you're entering a timesheet, that's user enter timesheet saves. And then you have another test that says administrator approves. You shouldn't have the test that enters the timesheet before you can do the administrator approves. What you should do is have that second test with the administrator approves. As a setup, it just fakes out the database or inserts data, so there's already a timesheet waiting. So there's this kind of a thing where if you've got a multi-step, multi-approval thing, just get the data into a state so you can just test that thing and really decouple your tests.
And being able to do those sort of tricks is exactly why you want to get out of Selenium IDE as soon as you possibly can, says the maintainer of Selenium IDE.
Next question.
Come on, we can't have exhausted the room already.
Okay, good. Brian?
Are you guys considering moving Alphabet Jam or something like that?
Wow.
Yes. Okay.
Are we thinking of moving to GitHub? No. And there's lots of reasons for that. Like,
have we tried to get Simon to agree to a move to GitHub? Yes.
yeah, I get, like, I have many roles in the project. The main one at the moment appears to be chief kicking boy. So the people come along and go, why isn't this working? Boot. It's all good. I love you guys.
I would love to hear Brett's opinion on how awesome GitHub is.
But wait a second, because there are good technical reasons for not moving to GitHub. One of them is we check in a lot of binary artifacts to our build. And normally the conversation goes like, if you got rid of all the binary artifacts in the history of the project, you could move to GitHub. Move to GitHub. And it's like, well, if we get rid of the binary artifacts and the history of the project, we're getting rid of a lot of the value. Like, the binary artifacts allow us to build in a self-contained way. And, Jason sits in a plane quite often. I sit on a plane. Like, we've got terrible wireless internet connections in hotels. It allows us to continue working on the project. And hopefully there should be a better solution than that. Like, I've got no problem with a distributed version control system, but I've got a problem with one that mandates the way that I work.
The water project migrated to GitHub about 2 years ago, and we've seen a significant increase in contributions from the community, and I think it's also helped us just grow the committers team as well, because the thing, if you haven't used GitHub or if you haven't used Git, is that essentially anybody can have full access to their own copy of the repository, and that repository can either be local, which is how pretty much everyone uses it, even the committers, or they can kind of publicly fork it, and so people can see what you're doing. And so before we had this, people would go off and they would make their own copies. They would check it out. They would check out our code from some version, and then they would make a whole bunch of changes, and then they would say, oh, I want to give this stuff back to you, and they just dropped this giant turd on us. And we were like, what are we going to do with this? And I remember one in particular we got. It just was so much stuff. And some of it was brilliant. Some of it was like, I like where this is going, but this isn't it. It's not ready. And some of it was just crap. And our ability to sift through that, because it was all just one commit, it was all one giant diff, was impossible. And so we just basically threw the whole thing away. And if that had been done, if we had been using GitHub at that time, we would have had separate commits for all those different pieces, and we could very easily cherry pick the ones that we really liked. We could have tagged the ones that we thought were worth working on, and then we could have just chucked the ones we didn't like, and we could have gone forward, I think.
Did you hear that?
I dozed off for a bit there.
Any others, peanut gallery? Next question. Way in the back in the door frame. That's a follow-up to the previous one. Run our own Git server. Let's argue about that over beers. Okay. Yeah. All right. Next question. Wow. Okay. Oh, in the back. So I didn't catch the very first part. Was it? What could you do with a Firefox profile? Hold on.
Okay, so the question is, what can you do with, like, if you create a profile on the fly? Like yesterday, I showed an example of how you can build up a profile, set your preferences, and then you can do something like client-side profiling that it generates a HAR file. Again, you can if you want to. Your website relies on an extension, and you want to run it on a different server. What you could do is you could generate your profile in your code, then create a remote WebDriver and go, here's my profile, and I would like it on that machine down there, please. And then it will just send it across, and you can start using it that way. And that means you don't have to, like with Selenium 1, if you want to use the RC with a profile, you have to start the RC up and go, don't forget to use this profile. And then if you want it on multiple machines, you have to make sure that you copy it to all the different machines and use it that way. Where this way, with Selenium 2, you generate it programmatically, and then you can go, right, I want it on these machines. And if you're running in parallel, it just splits it out, and you can send it out that way.
Yeah, that was a good answer. Anybody? All right. Definitely, if you have more questions for him, find David afterwards about profiles, because I got nothing. Yeah, that was good. Yes? And the answer, no. The answer is no, and the question is?
No. How many people here actually use user extensions? Okay. 6 out of 250 or more. So for those of you who don't know, user extensions are a way of dynamically extending the commands that are available to Selenium. Selenium 1, RC. They're used for a number of purposes, and those purposes tend to fall down into certain groups. Like, I want to be able to locate an element. I've got, which is really, really popular, but sometimes I think the most popular one that I've heard is like, oh, I want to use jQuery as a locator mechanism in Selenium. So they add a user extension that provides jQuery. Well, the nice thing is with WebDriver, when you execute JavaScript, you're executing in the context of the page that's already there. If your site uses jQuery, you can just use jQuery. You don't need a new you don't need to dynamically extend the functionality of WebDriver to do that. Other reasons for doing it? What are other reasons? Performance. Tapping into a model view controller framework. Well, you can just execute JavaScript at that point. Like, you can, because the way that we execute JavaScript is a bit more convenient than it used to be with Selenium 1. Like, if you run Selenium 1 in multi-window mode, when you call getEval, you're not actually running the script in the application under test. You're running it in the Selenium runner window. And we've put a var window equals getCurrentWindow to allow you to refer to window. But you're not where you think you are. With WebDriver, you are where you think you are. So you can just reach in and call any methods you want. Does anyone else have an opinion? Sure. Oh, Kevin's got one.
Yeah, sure. Kevin's going to make up his rule.
Yeah, so so you just gave the example of using jQuery already on the page. I would argue that if you've set up your tests such that they rely on a particular version of jQuery, they shouldn't be subjected to whatever version the application now loads in. So if the application upgrades its version of jQuery, you could at that point destabilize your tests, which shouldn't have been impacted at all. So say I write a whole slew of tests that are tied to jQuery 1.2.6, and the site now uses jQuery 1.5.2. If I'm always using the version that the page loads, like the QA team is now subjected to whatever design decisions the app team makes, or if you're even combined. It just seems like a bad idea.
So, so the reason why you want to be able to reuse jQuery isn't because you like jQuery, it's because the app uses jQuery, and you want to be able to use the same locators in your tests as you do in the app. Like, you want to be able to share that stuff. That, the developers will go,
Thank you.
good, excellent. Sorry, Kevin just admitted he had no idea about that teams did that. Bless you. Or in my experience, that's what happens. So actually, when you upgrade the version of jQuery in the app, you also want to be upgrading the version of jQuery you're using in your tests, in my humble opinion. Also, if you're dependent on 1.2.6, if you're relying on a bug in that, don't do that. Gentleman by the... So the question is it not going into Selenium 2 because of a technical or a philosophical reason? Bit of both. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I'll let Jason continue.
So the original spec for WebDriver, and I believed in the purism of this theoretically pure design, where it was WebDriver does what a human can do. You, as a human, with your finger on your iPhone, can't inject JavaScript into the page magically. So therefore, the testing tool shouldn't. Very clean argument. Like, I can't argue with that, except for the fact that that is way too dogmatic. So I argued strenuously over little instant messaging messages over months and years, saying, at least throw us a bone. At least give us a execute JavaScript commands. Through that, you could probably reverse engineer the rest of the user extension stuff. Actually, a couple of teams at my previous employer, the only part of the Selenium API that they used was the getEval, the JavaScript execution. They injected their entire thing through that tunnel. It's like the interstate commerce clause, kind of like you can do everything through that. And so we have that. He let in, and he can't take it back now, the execute JavaScript commands. So I would say, yeah, we're not going to do it, but it's also because he kind of gave us the secret backdoor to do it. So we'll collude. Don't tell him. All right. Anybody else? All right, next. Could I actually request a question from Paul Hammond? Yeah. Oh, or has he already been doing? Did he leave? He threatened that he was going to lob some grenades, but apparently no. All right. Okay. Next one. In front.
I think I know the answer to this as well.
And who's answering it?
Any possibility
Oh.
that
Sure. So let me see. There was a lot there. So you want to know if we can inject headers in Selenium too? Right. If we'll ever allow that.
And if not, then why maintain the cookie modification? Because it seems like if the line is that you want to really emulate what a human does and prohibit that which a human does not do, why allow cookie modification when you're not going to allow header modification?
So I'll attack the first part, and then Simon will take the mic from me, and he'll hit me, and then he'll answer the second part for you. So Simon and I have actually jarred over this a little bit in the past, and then Patrick got involved. And so Selenium 1 does have the ability to add headers. It distinctly lacks the ability to then remove them, which is kind of problematic. Particularly if you're doing things like a very common case is to provide basic authentication. Once you add that, it maintains it for every request, and it'll do it for any images that go through that proxy, any JavaScript, any resource that basically goes through that proxy, which is not that ideal. So we've kind of just accepted that, well, it took me a long time to accept it, but we're going to leave that the way it is. And Patrick has actually got a separate proxy server, browser mob proxy that you can find on GitHub, where you can then go ahead and inject those headers. And that whole thing will happen outside the context of Selenium.
Good answer. The main thing is philosophical. Like, Selenium is a browser automation framework. It's not a web monkeying around with HTTP headers framework. Like somebody said earlier, was talking about the Unix philosophy of like do one thing and do it well. We do browser automation, and we do it extraordinarily well. But I'm afraid that we don't do header manipulation. We make it easy to hook in a dynamic proxy. So, you know, if you go download the browser mob proxy, proxy.browsermob.com, awesome bit of kit. You can hook it in super easily, and then you're away and you're laughing, and you can get far better capabilities.
This also adds another reason to use dynamic Firefox profiles, because what you'll probably do is, because it's never going to get committed to the mainline trunk of the project, you write a little browser extension that injects headers, and then when you launch your browsers, you take along this little browser extension. And then, of course, you're going to have to write a browser extension for every browser, but anyway, there you go.
And just to, the second part of your question, if we do not allow header modification, why then does the API allow cookie modification? In one sense, the user can, at least at the level of deleting them, the user can, in fact, modify the browser cookies. So at least at the level of deleting them, and you know.
And the way we modify cookies is we use JavaScript. We go document.cookie, and we monkey around with it like that. Like Jason's backdoor is there. That came out wrong, but you know what I mean. Next question. Let's move on to the next question.
Can I have a request for a question?
Oh, there's a real question.
Okay, real question.
Real question, lady in there. Tools to automate mobile apps. Do you mean, yeah, native apps like, you know, written for Android or iOS, or do you mean ones running on a web view inside a browser, or written specifically for iPhone or Android? Gosh, I know of a few, and there's a team here who you should really talk to. Does one of the team want to stick their hand up and maybe just, yeah, can I say what it is? Okay, so these guys back here, they're working on a really awesome idea, which is to take the WebDriver APIs, which, you know, everyone's familiar with and which are quite popular, and use that to allow you to drive a native application. So, you know, you can use find element, click, send keys, like all those methods from the WebDriver APIs on a native app. And I think it's a fantastic idea. They've got like a proof of concept for Android, and they're going to do a lightning talk tomorrow, and you'll hear a lot more about it there for 5 minutes.
So we're in a little bit of a Cambrian explosion for mobile testing right now. Kind of, it seems a little bit of like 2004 all over again. There's a whole bunch of tools that I've seen that actually I'm a fan of. I haven't seen that, so by default, no. I trust you. That's awesome. There's also iQuke. It's kind of like, it's a little bit too coupled into a whole bunch of different projects. It's like a fork of Cucumber specifically for native iPhone testing. It hooks into the user interface or the UI accessibility thing in iPhone. So iQuke is really pretty demos. It looks like it works. There's Phone Monkey. I have not used that, but
I've only seen it. I haven't used it.
okay. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, Pete Hodgson, and he actually gave a presentation on this it's called Frank. It's short for like Frankenstein, for testing native iPhone apps. So the video is out there. Also, just find the Frank project on GitHub. Also, the one other one I'm a big fan of, I saw this just recently, and invited her to come speak. Actually, she gave a track B talk, Ing, who works at Intuit. She wrote a tool called Mowit, short for mobile end-to-end testing. I saw a demo of it for Android and BlackBerry. That's in there. One of the crazy cool things about that is for native apps. And the way how do you know when you launch the app to know when to go on to the next step? Like this constant question I'm surprised we haven't gotten yet. I'm like, wait for page load or wait for element. What she did is like, how do you know when a native app should go on? She does a system call out to ImageMagick and does an image diff. And when the image is different, it knows to go on with a test. And that was like PhD stuff like 2 years ago. And now it's like, oh, I just make a system call to ImageMagick, and then that's how you do your test. So Mowit is actually pretty cool. It's kind of new and raw and awesome, but that's out there. And then so that's all native stuff. And then the last thing for mobile web, I would just say use Selenium 2, because it's there already. And it's awesome. All right. Next question. I've got a request for one then. Could we get a little bit more water versus Selenium controversial stuff going on here? Can you?
We could just take a break.
No. Any nothing. No one's got a water Selenium. You do?
How can I tell when I should continue my tests?
How should you?
You know, I don't know when my app finishes doing something, and how do I know that it's okay to continue? Do I use thread.sleep?
No. Anybody else?
In Selenium 2, there's a really nice feature called implicit waits, where you just go, wait for this, then it'll send it to the server. The server will poll the browser, and then the browser will send it back going, oh, it's time to work, and now you can use it. It doesn't work in all instances, but it works in quite a few. And
I would love to hear Brett's. Water has implicit waits.
Yeah, we've had that for some time. Yeah, that was really one of the things that I think made Water take off when it came out, was that all the other tools you had to put sleeps in there, you had to worry about synchronization, and we have some fairly complicated logic. It's probably the most complicated logic in the Water code base, which is just focused on IE, and it says, you know, are you ready? Has the page loaded? Okay, you've told me the page loaded, but we know you lie all the time, so we're going to ask you again another way, and then we're going to ask another way. And we have tuned that code over the years so that it works really well until all this AJAX stuff started bouncing all over the place. And so to some degree, we had it as a solved problem for several years, but now it's kind of jumping up and biting us again. And we're having to do the same thing as everybody else now, where you have to say, here's the element to wait for. You know, this is what needs to be here. When this thing is here, then I know we're ready to keep moving on. And so people are coding that pretty regularly. We still have a lot fewer. I was surprised, you know, in some of the talks, and I've seen how many, just where people are putting a certain number of seconds to delay or this or that in the Selenium code. That's still really considered taboo in the Water community to have any of that. And we pretty much make fun of people when we see that. And we have little jokes, and there's one particular person who we found a sleep statement once, and it was like 602 or something like that. And we were like, okay, 600 wasn't enough. They needed 602 milliseconds or something, and so that's become like the 42 joke now that we use all the time when we just throw a number out.
The table of trouble has a question. Marlena? All right, so the question is to discuss the proxy battle of Selenium versus water vis-a-vis Google versus Facebook, with Google equals Selenium and Facebook equals water.
So I was speaking to the Facebook people, and they were saying they use water a lot. And then I showed them how they did Python, and they love Python. And I think they're considering moving to Selenium 2 now. So I think that battle might be won.
Of course, with Water WebDriver, they're already using Selenium too. I should point that out. It comes down to that thing of personal preference. Like, which API do you prefer? Because the underlying technology is becoming moot. Like, we're working really hard to make that underlying technology moot, so you can then do things that you like. Jason's doing a little boogie. Okay.
So Selenium, and there's really three projects represented here. I think it might have been communicated, but I'll just repeat it again. Selenium, water, WebDriver. WebDriver with Simon is kind of like the Switzerland of the tools. Selenium and water were created at the same time. I mean, almost literally the same floor, the same office, the same city, the same month in Chicago. I mean, you had a couple of previous versions, but I still remember the whiteboard session where we're like hashing out, and Selenium was only a month old, and you were on, it was WTR, it wasn't water yet. And anyway, but we went on these very parallel tracks of existence for years because I had all this crazy HTML and JavaScript stuff where you wrote your tests in tables, this utter monstrosity. Sorry about that. And and Brett's sitting here going, object-oriented Ruby code is cool. You should drive it from the outside in through COM bindings. It's elegant. It works. And I'm like, okay. And I had no idea how right he was. It took me a long time. And so we went on these parallel tracks, but we never could find a way to actually integrate at a technical level. And then Simon comes around and creates this WebDriver thing. And I said, aha, let's do the reverse coup. I realized, oh my God, Selenium needs a new lease on life. Like OS 9 to OS 10, we needed a new thing. So the reverse coup is like, hey, let's make WebDriver the future of Selenium. And then Yari Bakken had the same idea, like, hey, let's make the future of the water project, WebDriver. And the funny thing was, I don't think Yari knew that I had preempted him by like a month saying, no, Selenium, WebDriver is going to be the future of Selenium. So these projects both kind of came to this realization that we need to jump on the WebDriver bandwagon. So the answer is there is no fight because we're actually merging to the same underlying code base. So now it's just kind of like, do you prefer blondes versus brunettes? But there's a stylistic thing. This is a terrible verge for this conversation.
So several years ago, we got a prototype of running the water API against Selenium RC. And I'd seen all along, I mean, I helped, as Jason knows, I helped launch, I was working on these things, and my goal was to get better tools, open source, to do testing. That's why I was doing this stuff, and that's what I was involved in. And I had some ideas, and I think Selenium has always been strong on its cross-browser support and on its as a technology suite that had support for multiple languages. And Water was strong, I think, in its API. And so what we plan to do is to continue to support that API using whatever technology is going to be the most successful. And we prototyped it with Selenium RC, and we could have taken that step then, and we just didn't have really the energy around it, so we didn't. It wasn't for any philosophical reason. And now that WebDriver's come out, and we've had so many people jumping on that, and Yari's been helping out, we're thrilled to be doing that, and we're thrilled to be working together on this, because even with Selenium, you have choices, right, between are you going to do it in Python, what type of API are you going to use? Selenium has multiple APIs, and so sometimes I think, well, Water 2, we want to say Water now with Selenium, now fortified with Selenium. That might be how we brand it. I don't know. But it kind of pulls it out, and then it's like, well, what does it really mean? And I think it comes around to some of the branding, and what does the Water brand mean, and what does the Selenium brand mean, and what's included or not. And I think that was some of the discussion before, like really like with Selenium Grid. I mean, there's questions about what's in the project. And there's also questions about how you manage the brand and what projects get the brand and what don't. And I think those are some of the things we're still just kind of sorting out.
Thanks. Sorry about the blonde brunette thing. That was inappropriate. Good answer, though. Next question.
I haven't really used WebDriver yet. I was wondering if you guys could give us a sense of the support for browsers. Like how does the Chrome support versus IE support versus Firefox support, and how does that relate to how the rest of it supported in Selenium 1? Because mostly we use Firefox because it's faster and better supported. I'm curious as to how that's changed.
What the heck? So here's the dirty secret about Selenium 1. Oh, the question was, what's the level of browser support in Selenium 2, and how does that compare with Selenium 1? Just to condense it down. Cool. So here's the dirty little secret, which we don't tell many people, but most of you know anyway. Selenium 1 doesn't support all browsers equally. Like the Firefox driver, the Star Chrome, fantastic. That works really well, and you can do all sorts of clever things like upload files and monkey around and go cross-domain, and it's okay. By the time you get down to like Safari or Opera, like the support gets really, it's there, but it's not as good. We're, on Selenium 2 with WebDriver, there are still different levels of support. Like the Firefox driver is fantastic. The IE driver, thanks to the hard work of Jim here, is also fantastic. The existing Chrome driver, if I may be so bold, is crap. Yeah, there's nods on the stage. Yeah, and we know it's not that great. And until Opera came along, we had no story at all for Opera. And for Safari, we delegate down to Selenium. And now things are getting interesting. Like, we've got really good support for Opera. And the reason why we've got really good support for Opera is because Opera Software said, hey, here's a handy API that seems to be getting traction and adoption. And they've done their own implementation. So the WebDriver Opera support is phenomenal. And kudos to Opera for doing that. We're working on a new Chrome driver. That Chrome driver is baked in the Chromium code base. It's not in our tree at all. So when that comes out, that's also going to be spectacular. We're working with Mozilla. David up here works for Mozilla to try and get sort of the WebDriver technology baked into Mozilla's test tools. Because when you've got that, then the browsers, the support becomes phenomenal. Obviously, IE and Safari are the open questions, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually. Like, we're working on standardization, and when that happens, I think we're going to be in a really good place as a testing community. David or anyone else, did you want to add anything? Cool, excellent. People are smiling. Not used to that. Does anyone want to do a really challenging question? We've got a few minutes left. Yeah, okay, yeah, go for it.
Sometimes we need to use other tools like Autoic along with Selenium to handle allowing windows and stuff. Is there any plan to provide those kind of support in Selenium? What is, for example, already shipped Autoic distribution?
Okay, so the question is, are we planning on shipping stuff to allow you to control Windows at the operating system level? Can you guess what this answer is going to be?
I'm tired of saying, oh, so wait, did we repeat the question? Yeah, you did. Yeah. I'm tired of saying no to that question because it gets asked all the time. So the answer is yes, but I'm going to get outvoted.
So like with Selenium 2, one of the, like, or with Selenium 1, one of the questions people always ask is, how do I upload stuff? They always want to upload stuff, and the way people get around it is they use AutoIt, and they do some really nasty stuff, and it just kind of works. But with Selenium 2, like definitely in the IE driver, and that you can upload, and it does all the really nice things, and you can actually see it going down and doing all those things, which then removes the kind of need to do AutoIt, because that tends to be the main reason why people go to AutoIt. But yeah, I would always avoid something like AutoIt.
Yeah, so I mean, David's got the point. Like, there are only a handful of dialogues that a browser often throws up. You know, authentication, download, upload. You know, good lord, this site isn't secure. Window.alert, prompt confirm, stuff like that. We've got APIs to deal with most of those. The big two that are missing are authentication, you know, the basic or digest or NTLM support. And people keep on saying to me downloads. Like at some point, it'll go into this incredibly dense skull. So we're not going to ship third-party tools that do that, but we may provide APIs that allow you to deal with those dialogues.
Last question. Last question. In the back. Oh, wait. Is that the right one?
I don't know.
In the back. I guess there's two ways to do that. If you could install it into a custom sorry, repeat question. Can Selenium at some point deal with client-side certificates? But it's client-side certificates, not like SSL. Okay, so can it handle it, or will we? My take on this is one of those good things, and another reason for a custom profile. The best, so if you don't have it installed, sometimes it'll have a little pop-up. The best pop-up to ever deal with is the one that you can configure away so it never ever happens, so you don't have to deal with it. One way to deal with it is to install it into a profile. You can use the dynamic profiles. That's one thing to do. So I think the functionality is already there, but we have to be better about documenting how you would use existing functionality to do it.
Or just don't use self-signed certificates and pay $12 and buy a certificate.
Yeah, do less.
Or, like, one of the things we see quite a lot as testers, and people attempting to automate tests, is the golden hammer syndrome. You know, I've got a tool, I'm going to use it to crack every single problem available to me. You know, there may be something where it might be okay to use a blended approach where you go up to a certain point using the WebDriver or Selenium APIs or the Water APIs. That dialog pops up, and maybe, you know, it's an RSA key thing where you need to enter in a special thing, and you've got security baked in via some weird card space provider from .NET or something. Who knows? At that point, you know, break out something like White or the UI automation or Frankenstein or some other tool to go, you know, find the window and type, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and dismiss it, and then switch back to the WebDriver APIs. Like, we don't need to solve every problem. It's fun to solve every problem, but we don't need to solve it ourselves.
All right, thank you. That ends the panel. Can I hear it for the panel?